Welcome to the Artistic Foodies, the show that explores life through the lens of art and food. I'm Abbas Mohamed,
And I'm Irfan Rydhan.
and today we're talking with journalist Aymann Ismail about the upcoming show on PBS called American Muslims, A History Revealed. We also chat with him about his favorite halal restaurants in the US, exploring lenses and biases, and discussing truth versus fact. So make sure you listen all the way through.
Aymann Ismail is an award winning human interest writer who is renowned for creating Who's Afraid of Aymann Ismail, a Slate video series which offers an intimate portrayal of American Muslims and their adversaries with sincerity. He also hosted Man Up, a podcast providing a blueprint for navigating complex emotions, shaping discussions on masculinity. His book, Becoming Baba: Fatherhood, Faith, and Finding Meaning in America, comes out next summer. Thank you very much for joining us today. Let's just start off with the little bit of basic questions about what's your personal background, where's your family from, and stuff like that.
What you mean where I'm from? Huh?
Where are you really
I'm from here. I'm from America.
Where are you really from?
No, I'm from New Jersey. So I got a little bit of an attitude problem. My parents came from Egypt, so I got a double layer of attitude problem.
Oh, wow.
Interesting story about them. They come from totally polar opposite parts of society out there. So my dad is what's called a Saidi. So he's like a Falahi. He grew up on a farm. And my mom is a Iskandaraniya. So she comes from like the port city from the north. So she's very cosmopolitan. And she says things like merci. And my dad says stuff like dale, So it's like culture clash, even inside the house, even in America, before we even get to the growing up American thing. But yeah, so it's interesting because sometimes my friends are like, "Hey, which do you say? Falafel, طعمية?" I'm like, "Por qué no los dos?" Because I grew up in New Jersey.
Is Damiya more the Falahi or more like the city upper class way of saying it?
My dad will say طعمية because he also, contrary to what he says about growing up Falahi, he also spent a lot of time in Cairo.
There we go.
His Saidiness is questionable, but I would never question it. You know what I'm saying?
Is the طعمية the ملوخية مع الدجاج the محشي بالكوسة, but of course the king is kushari. That's it for me. It's always the kushari.
Kushari, it's okay.
It's all about that sauce.
It's about sauce, but like, would you rather have kushari or mulukhaya? To me, there's no question.
Molokhaya, yeah, for sure.
Kushari is Egyptian and it's beautiful and like I love it. I'm not gonna shade it, but like you may as well just go have Italian. You want macaroni, go have Italian, right? Molokhaya though, Molokhaya is like that earth. Molokhaya is like you're just straight up drinking some Nile water. Like that to me that's what you want.
That's a special day dish. That's like only made on Jummah.
Yeah, if you go to like an Egyptian restaurant and order kushari, I got questions for you. Okay. Go to the Taste of Tuscany. Go get something better. You want something Egyptian? Don't waste your time with kushari, man. It's like I'm not gonna say that. I'm gonna get slapped. You should waste your time with kushari, but if you can really, really, really want to dive into the Egyptian palate, you need, like you said, straight up hammam. That's what you want to get.
Man, I've never had pigeon in my life. Never. I'm open, but I've never.
I feel sorry for you, man. Do you have Egyptian friends? Do you have like a lot of Egyptian friends?
I did growing up. كنت عايش في السعودية 7 سنين في الرياض.
Wow.
And international school, so I picked up a lot from everybody. A little bit of this, a little bit of that.
All right. So maybe they didn't like you enough to invite you home, like when they were having pigeon, but I don't know, man. Like a good, solid pigeon meal will last you a lifetime.
Yeah, I bet you could have a great pigeon restaurant in New York. Solve two problems at once.
A fun fact: the genie from the original Alf Layla wa Layla was actually a pigeon.
Is this real?
They rubbed the lamp, and then a pigeon flew out.
Got me doing spit takes out
Oh
here.
wow! Oh wow! We're gonna keep that spit in there in the final cut. But go back to the back to the questions here. So tell us a little bit about your background in journalism. Like, did you is that what you wanted to study officially, or you just kind of got into that in a different direction?
Fell into it very much so. I wanted to be a filmmaker. I thought of myself as like the Arabic Quentin Tarantino.
Mm.
I grew up watching ART and like Ismail Yassin and like the classic ancient, like I was gonna say ancient Egyptian cinema, just like the old ancient Egyptian cinema. And I really loved it, you know, and I wanted to continue in that tradition. Then I got to what I thought was film school, was art school, but they actually disbanded the entire department the day that I got there. So I showed up for orientation. I met all the video teachers. They showed me the studio. They showed me all the cameras. I was bright eyed. I got twinkle in my eye. I was very excited. First day, they were like, "Oh, by the way, not enough students actually signed up for this program, so we're just not going to have it."
Oh
So they were like,
man!
"Okay, pick a new major." And I was enrolled in the art school, and I asked if I can get my tuition back and or do something, and they were like, "No, no, no. You just can either pick a new major or withdraw, and then reapply next year." I said, "Khalas, I'm an art student now." So yeah, I studied visual arts, and I
That bait
I
and
studied like
switch.
yeah, I mean, so this is how I rationalized it to myself. I was thinking, so many other kids are going to be going to film school, and they're going to be trying to be director, and everybody wants to be a director. I was like, I'm going to try to do like the color route. I'm going to really, really study art, and then I'm going to know how to compose. I'm going to know how to edit. I'm going to know everything about like the actual art behind the actual production. And so I thought this is going to give me a great foundation. But I wanted more film experience on campus. So what I did instead was I got into journalism by first going to like this TV station. It's called RUTV. It was for the Rutgers Television Network. It's kind of boring, kind of whack. I did it for like a year, and then afterwards I got fired. So I was like, all right, what else am I going to do? So I went to the daily newspaper. It's called the Daily Targum, and they had something of a multimedia desk where they just posted photo slideshows. But I was like, you guys don't do video. This is whack. Let me sit down and show you guys how it's done. And they hired me, and then I became the very first ever video producer to work for the newspaper. And then after that, I fell in love. I really like the access that you got as a journalist, where if you have a camera and a credential, you can go literally anywhere and talk to literally anyone. If I wanted to, I could like go to like the concerts. Like if J. Cole was coming to do a concert at campus, I had access. I could go talk to him. You know, if I wanted to talk to the president after a scandal, presidents of the university, I can get access to them and I could talk to them. And so I got really obsessed with the unprecedented like master key to the entire university life. And also it made me feel pretty cool, and like girls I knew were like, hey, can you get me into this show? I'm like, yeah, I got you. Let me just let me talk to the guy at the door. And I'd be like, oh yeah, this is my intern. And they'd be like, sure, whatever. So it was a dream come true to be a journalist on campus. And then afterwards, when I moved to New York City, I got really lucky. I got a job working at a art magazine. So it was like the culmination of everything that I'd studied as a visual art student, and then everything that I'd learned to love about journalism with going to talk to people. So I ended up spending a lot of time in artist studios talking to them about their craft. This magazine also had an appetite for danger, so I got to do a lot of like illegal, illicit art stuff. So I spent a lot of time with the graffiti writers, got to climb some bridges, got to go into some tunnels. I interviewed this guy named Kobe Kennedy who was stealing street signs and sharpening them and turning them into weapons. So I fell in love. I fell in
Wow!
love with the world of with journalism. And then along comes the Arab Spring, and I get excited because I want to get that access to the people on the ground, the revolutionaries. And I thought Anderson Cooper was doing a shitty job. I was like, you can't just show up to a place, not speak the language, and then try to relay what these people are saying to you. Because in my head, if they're talking to you in English, that's already one layer of filter. They can't be candid. And then and also if you only talk to people who can't speak English, that's another layer. Like you're only talking to a privileged class. So I thought of myself as somebody who had the privilege of speaking Egyptian Arabic, and being able to go was a dream of mine. Being able to go was a dream of mine. So when my editor, he was going to go do like a weed he's going to be a judge in like this weed competition in Amsterdam, and he was like, "Oh, I might just like fly over to Cairo and like go check it out." I'm like, "I'm going. I'm literally going to be there. You're not allowed to tell me no." And he was like, "No, no, I can't. It's a liability thing. It's dangerous." I'm like, "Ah, man, I'm there. It doesn't matter. You can't tell an Egyptian kid not to show up to Egypt." So I go. I get my cousins to act like my fixers. Shout out to Osama and Yasser. They got into they put themselves in dangerous, precarious situations just because they can't say no to their cousin. So I definitely took advantage of that.
Nice.
And
So,
yeah, after that, I fell in love with the idea of storytelling and using my access and my privilege to my community to tell stories that only I could tell. And that's sort of how I ended up being a journalist here at Slate, staff writer. It all just sort of happened organically. Alhamdulillah.
nice, very cool. So, what was the years that you were in university? What year was that?
Um, '07 to 11.
Oh, okay, great. Just trying to get the time frame here.
You can look this up on LinkedIn. You don't have to ask me.
Yeah, LinkedIn. So, I think we're gonna go back to the this viral video about the bean pie that you're famous for. But before we get into that, what is the new series that you have now, which is it's called American Muslims?
There you
Is
go.
that correct?
American
Um,
Muslims.
so I remember hearing about this a few years back because I don't know if you know Dr. Hussein Rashid. He was, I think, one of the original people behind it, and I think he eventually stepped away from it. But uh, I remember hearing about it a long time back, maybe 5, 6 years ago. So I know it's a long process of putting together these kind of documentaries and series. So how did you get involved with that, and tell us a little bit about the process of making it.
Man, that's so cool. I didn't know that Dr. Hussein was part of this. I've interviewed him a few times before, and he tells a great story about encountering Islamic art for the first time at the Met. Uh, love that guy. He's really,
Yeah,
really incredible. So I got involved, I want to say late into the process. They had already established like the principal idea of the series. I was approached first by Zahir Ali, who is a historian, uh, very, 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 very talented academic and historian. Um, he was actually in the episode where I was doing the episode about the bean pie. So there's a little crossover right there.
yeah,
So the bean pie brought me to this project, and they had essentially laid out the idea. They were like, we're going to try and retell the history of America, but through a prism that does not exclude the Muslims that were there. That was the principal idea, right? Uh, they're not trying to focus on like this like good immigrants narrative where we need to prove ourselves and we need to show, hey, look, we were here. And they were very adamantly against it. They're like, no, this is not that. What we're doing is we're repairing the history, and we're telling it the way that it should have been told, without purposefully excluding the stories of uh, non-white, non-male characters who I think all of us learned about in high school and learned about in elementary school as being the forefathers of America. So I was already intrigued. I was thinking, rewrite history. Can we do that? Is that allowed? I thought like history was this thing, right? It's like you can't remake the ancient Egyptian pyramids. They exist. Uh, but the way he explained it was, we like history itself is a humbling monster, and that it's constantly being changed and it's constantly being excavated, and it blew my mind. So right from the very beginning, I wanted to be involved in any way that I can, and they suggested that I be some kind of on-camera talent as a shepherd to bring the viewer along so that they can experience the story and also simulate learning for people who are watching it at home, which I believe very strongly in. This idea that you could tell a story, but what's more powerful than telling the story is showing somebody digesting, learning, having their mind changed, and experiencing watching the series alongside you. It's like, yeah, I'm really, 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 really glad that they approached me to do that because I love to learn. I love to be um, that guy with that access. So when they said, "Hey, we got like PBS on board," I knew that we were going to get access to crazy stuff. So right after that, the very first thing we shot was about a year after that, and it was at the Monticello, which was the residence of Thomas Jefferson. And I was thinking, oh man, I've been here before. It's going to be packed. They had, because PBS was involved, they were able to get the space isolated for several hours in the morning, and we got access to the person's library. We went to the Library of Congress, and the head archivist of the entire Library of Congress was sitting across from us, and he was opening the books that physically were handled and managed and owned by Thomas Jefferson, like hundreds of years ago. And he was like, "Here, you want to hold it? Here." And he just flung it into the air, and I had to like catch it. So it was, mind blowing experience. And yeah, I hope we did the stories justice. Honestly, like the stories are just so large and consequential, and it's kind of scary when you come into a situation like that, where because you're just a guy, you're just a guy, and you're facing down the entire, not just the history of America, but the ethos, the way America sees itself. And so to try and affect change in that realm is daunting. It's scary. And yeah, it's a no-brainer for somebody like me. Like I want to give that project everything that I can.
I'm noticing a little bit of a theme here. This Axis stuff is really tantalizing.
Yeah. Isn't it for you?
I mean, it has. Last year it was at South by Southwest and was able to get screener links for films before they premiered and got to have private chats with the directors.
It's a whole new way of experiencing media.
Yeah, and music and shows and artistic production, because one thing about the artistic foodies is the lens we look through is art and food. So we're always at the forefront of art stuff and food stuff, which like these two things are the foundations of culture, of how you experience culture.
Yeah. And dude, like Muslims, we love exclusive stuff, man. Like we want to be the first to go to Jannah.
As-sabiqun, as-sabiqun.
Yep.
So in regards to this show, American Muslim, there have been so many shows now out there about Muslims. We've had shows from different angles, everything from documentaries to, Disney pumping out Muslim shows. Now, why is this show needed right now? What gap is there that this show fills?
Yeah, I mean, Disney, when they put out like a Muslim show, it's just a Disney show with a Muslim character, right? This is a little bit like that, but it's American history, but with Muslim characters, which is amazing, right? Think of it this way. Right now, we're in a period of time in which there's this question of whether or not, there's this doubt, I want to say, that exists in the minds of millions of Americans that Islam and America, can it coexist? Can somebody be both of those things? You see it all the time. I mean, there was this fear that Barack Obama might have been a Muslim because everybody's like, oh my God, like we can't have a Muslim president. Like that's going to be everybody is going to explode. This is not going to work out. Right. And there's also this idea that Islam was this thing that exists far away. And when Muslims come over, they threaten to change the country. And so we exist in this reality as Muslims. Now, we might not interact with it every day because we're just people and we wake up and we want to drink coffee and we want to scoop our hummus with bread like everybody else. But the purpose of this project is not to teach Muslims that we can be American and Muslim at the same time. We know that already, right? Anybody with a brain knows that already. But what this show does is it speaks directly to the people who idolize the history of America, who look to people like Thomas Jefferson and think to themselves, wow, this person put out the most sophisticated, most successful project and thought ever and created this country that's founded on the principles of an idea, not an ethnicity, not a religion. This country is one of the only to ever be founded on an idea, right? Because of these people. And so what we're doing in this series is saying, hey, you like Thomas Jefferson? Well, did you know that Thomas Jefferson had a Quran? Did you know that Thomas Jefferson was interacting with Muslims? And that in his letters and while arguing with other people who were putting together the framework for this country, that they were experimenting with the idea of Muslims one day being the president of the United States. This is something that they thought about. And what we're doing is we're showing these stories to people because for some reason, I don't know, but these stories were left out. You don't hear about like the ambassador from Tripoli, Meli Meli, when you're learning about the history of America. Even though this was the person who was the reason for the very first iftar in the White House. Hey, come on, like that's an incredible story. Did you know that people were that the dinner used to be like served at like 3-4 p.m., but they had to postpone it until after sunset in order to honor the Islamic tradition of
Oh
Ramadan
wow! How long ago
in the
was
White
that?
House?
Are
I
we
mean,
talking recent history?
no, no, no. We're talking about like this is the White House before it got burnt down.
Who was the president at the time for the first? I remember
Uh,
hearing about that as well, about the ambassador coming.
you see, if Zahir was here, he would ring off the. He would ring it off.
Knew all these dates and everything.
Thomas Jefferson.
Oh, it was Thomas Jefferson. Okay.
Thomas Jefferson hosted the very first Muslim envoy during Ramadan, and he honored the tradition of having a Ramadan iftar at the White House.
Wow.
He's quite the
Wow.
Muslim sympathizer.
You know what?
This
You should read his letters. The episode where we like talk about Thomas Jefferson. My eyes are like whoa, because not because like I respect the guy like immensely as an American, which I do to a degree, but because I had no idea how much Islam influenced him or how much he interacted with Islam and respected it. I mean, he had a Quran in his library that was in English, the George Sales Quran. Um, it's incredible. I mean, we don't know whether or not Thomas Jefferson like read the Quran and from the Quran got the one-to-one idea that all men are created equal, even though it exists in the Quran. But what we do know is that he was interacting with Islam regularly, and he had a deep appreciation and respect for it. Very different than when people nowadays are saying, "Oh my God, we need to, we got to get rid of Barack Obama because he might be a Muslim." It's like totally different, uh, and this is very back when the very cornerstones of the country were being laid. So yeah, so all this is to say that this project got me excited, and it's especially relevant today because we often have to interface and interact with those kinds of people who have those beliefs about Islam in America. And now we have what I would call ammunition. We have evidence, historical evidence that's indisputable to show that this is a question that they were thinking about way back when, and they already came to an answer. So yeah, it doesn't. It's not something you have to worry about.
Now, how do you think Thomas Jefferson would feel about halal pork?
Thomas Jefferson or halal pork. I
The
mean, let's
great
see.
unifier of America.
So Thomas Jefferson wasn't just like like somebody who was thinking about philosophy all the time. He was also like a socialite, right? He had parties. He liked to invite people from all over the world. His house was designed in like a style of like the French Renaissance in the Monticello. It's a beautiful place. Um, Facing east, by the way. Which who knows? Maybe he was a closet Muslim, man. I don't know.
Takbir.
Man, Allahu Akbar. So I would say halal pork with him. He would be curious. He would want to try it, but then he might see a black person and get scared because he also owns steak. He might see somebody out of the corner of his eye and be like, "Oh,
So this just popped in my head when you're talking about PBS. So I think most of us, especially American Muslims, we are we grew up. Our parents probably were members of PBS, used to donate and all that stuff back in the day. But in today's media environment, and I've brought this up before to other people as well. Um, like the
I see."
people who need to see these type of or get this type of information that we're talking about, for example, like you just talked about Thomas Jefferson hosting the first iftar in the White House, right? Like people who watch PBS, they probably are already receptive to the ideas and they're familiar with this type of um, open dialogue that the founding fathers had, right, in interactions
Mhm.
with but the people who need to hear that or need to see that, they're not watching PBS, right? So how do we get this message to those people, right? So one of the, and you're a producer, I'm just putting this idea out there for you to think
Mhm.
about in the future, is like I had talked about this with another person as well. There was a dramatization made of the Jews uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto on NBC News. I still remember, sorry, NBC channel, mainstream TV, starring David Schwimmer. I still remember it because it was showing a dramatization of the Jews fighting back against the Nazis. And one Jewish person, I know I'm going off on a big tangent here, but he was, he basically committed a suicide bombing against the Nazis, right? But the the way that the dramatization was made, you're like cheering for that guy because he's
Mhm.
fighting back against his oppressors, right?
Yeah.
So how do we Muslims uh, g- show our point of view in a way which is will affect the American public because they're more into dramatizations and instead of watching documentaries, for example.
Hmm.
So that's my rant right there.
How do we get people who don't watch PBS to think of Muslims as humans? Is the question.
Yeah, in a nutshell, yeah, that's pretty
Okay,
much
well
it.
here's what I would recommend is we don't like I mean this is the thing, especially when it comes to media, we need a multi-pronged approach, right? You're not going to solve the problem with one approach. So you do need the PBS documentaries. You do need like the Disney Channel shows. You do need like the Hulu shows like Rami, and you also need people like Ayman Mohiddin on MSNBC. Like you need, I think, Muslims in media generally in every facet of it. Um, and I think it's going to be when it becomes impossible uh, to miss when you're seeing it everywhere. You can't help but think to yourself, okay, well, my understanding of what a Muslim is needs to encompass or account for the existence of all of this variety of Muslims that I've encountered somehow in media. That's what I believe, right? I think that's how every group in this country that has been isolated, especially like Jewish Americans, have been very successful in fighting anti-Semitism. Was not by like creating like instructional manuals on PBS. It's more so like they had, you know, Hey Arnold on TV would have like a Hanukkah special, you know. They would be like a Jewish character in whatever show, and it becomes it starts to feel natural. Like okay, cool, we have like such a variety of life, but when we don't also see Muslims in that mix, then it starts to feel like, well, what is this new thing? Where is this new thing coming from? And what I like about this PBS documentary so much is that we're starting way back from the very, very beginning. And now this question of what is this new thing becomes obsolete because it's existed from the very beginning. Um, but this is what I think makes it even more difficult to add another layer to that. Muslims don't even know this history. I didn't even know the story about the first White House iftar. So unless we educate ourselves first and empower ourselves with that knowledge, how are we going to empower the next generation of storytellers to put those parts of little bits of that history into the language that they're putting into their Muslim characters in whatever show? Um, I interviewed Rami from the Rami Hulu show a couple of times, and he always explained his show as being a jumping off point. Like his vision of a successful show was if this show were to open the doors and allow TV executives to understand that they were going to be there's a market for this kind of character. And then maybe it does make more sense to have like a Muslim character in this other show, and we're doing like a Superman and maybe it does make sense to have like a Muslim reporter, or maybe Superman comes and saves a Muslim from like falling off of a cliff or whatever, right? Uh, all of these side characters, I think, adds up. Right now, it's a little bit of a precarious phase because of this anti woke culture. So now there's like a new trapdoor that we need to work around, where the existence of non-white, non-male characters actually pisses off certain people, the kinds of people that you're talking about reaching. So I do think that it's like a slow granular effect, right? We got to carve the Grand Canyon with a slow river, and eventually, I think maybe not in our lifetime, maybe not in the generation of like my kids or something, but I think eventually it'll become undeniable that like Muslims are not only were they here from the very beginning, they were part of the ethos from the very beginning. If that makes sense, we're not the we weren't just like in the room when all of this like cool stuff with America was happening. We were actually on the minds of the founding fathers when they were drafting the first draft of what this country would be. So I think if we can do what a lot of other cultures have done so successfully, and create 1,000 stories and put them little bits of them every place, I think we can call ourselves like successful, and maybe we'll be able to not reach those people who are anti woke, but maybe they're kids, and maybe they're kids.
I
Very
think that's
good.
well said. So it sounds like what American Muslims, the show does is it looks at some of the core bricks or the foundations of what it means to be American, and then it says, "Hey, us too, we were there, same, but different."
Not just that, but like we were involved. You know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? So like in another episode, they it's not me, it's the other host. There's two other hosts. There's let me just make sure I get it. Esma Khalid, but okay, yeah. So there's two other hosts, right? There's Esma Khalid, who's the NPR's White House correspondent, and then there's Malika Bilal, who is a senior presenter for Al Jazeera. So in one of the episodes that Malika does, she follows along the story of a Muslim guy who is fighting in the civil war in America, right? So he's fighting for the North. He's fighting to abolish slavery in the South. But because he's neither white nor black, the people who are around him don't really know what to do with him. And so he gets to serve in like a all white regiment. But at the same time, during like one of their trips through some place, he actually gets arrested by the police and put into a contraband camp, which is where they would put runaway slaves.
Wow.
So he got to experience the entire paradigm of American reality at that time. So we get to tell the story of America at that time through the perspective of this one Muslim person. And you know what's incredible? It's because in making the series, I'm interacting with a lot of historians and academics, and to see them get excited over like one sheet of paper is so funny to me, because we have the internet, right? So we have like infinite troves of whatever information we want at our fingertips. But when they discover like one sheet of paper with like 80 words on it, they go, "This is a gold mine. This is amazing." For this one character for who fought in the Civil War, they had something like 200 pages because this person was applying for a pension, and the pensions office were like, "But you're not white, so how did you fight in a white regiment? We don't believe you. Your story doesn't make sense." And so he needed to visit this pension office over and over and over and over again to try to earn this pension that they were giving out to soldiers at the time. So he needed to lay out his entire life story, and that's why we know so much about this person. And so
Wow.
imagine, that this person not only existed, but they essentially wrote out the details of reciting the Quran during the Civil War. Like, wow, you know? Um, and in another episode, I talked to an expert called Edward Curtis, who's a historian. And one of the things I asked him was about this Lebanese family that existed in the early 1900s, late 1800s in the prairie lands in North Dakota. And we went there because this is where the very first mosque in America was built. The very first ever purpose-built mosque was built in North Dakota. Like that's crazy, right? And that's because this family that came from Lebanon, Syria, uh, they called it Greater Syria, but they were from the Bekaa Valley, so they're Lebanese, well, from modern day Lebanon. And so they came because they were trying to take advantage of the Homesteading Act, which was the United States' way of dispossessing Native Americans of their land by essentially settling and occupying land by Americans. And so they were giving away land for free. And so this family was like, we want land for free. Like we came from all the way over here, and they were Muslim. And so and he was like describing to me how we knew that they played Oud and they celebrated Eid, and they had brought so much of their culture, they preserved it there. And I was like, I can't imagine what it's like to be in North Dakota in like 1890 and coming across a family that plays Oud and is fasting their
Yeah.
And he was like, not only that, but they played baseball. And then that's when I was like, poof.
Wow.
They were there like everybody else, and they were building America from the bottom up, not just as witnesses, but they were part of the development of the culture. You know what I'm saying? And he went on, he was like, there's such a thing as Muslim cowboys. When we think about like the image of like their traditional cowboy versus Indians or whatever, they existed there too. They're Muslim cattle ranchers, the very beginning of like cattle ranching in America. Like they were always there. But what we're doing with American Muslims is we are finding these stories and pulling them to the center of the conversation when we're talking about the history of America. They weren't just there, they were partly responsible for the development of it. You guys, this is amazing. This story is crazy. And Muslims don't know this history. And think about what this is going to do for the next generation of Muslims. When they're in school and somebody's like, haha, Durka Durka, where's your family from? They're going to be like, my guy, I'm part of that community from like the late 1800s. I know my history. They're going to feel so much more confident and secure. Like I'm so excited for them, man.
Yeah, that's great. I did watch
1890.
that. I did watch.
1890 playing oud and baseball in the same day.
Yeah. No, I saw that episode on the PBS YouTube channel. That was great. And what was surprising to me is because my family we celebrate the Maulid, and when I heard that they used to even celebrate the Prophet's birthday during that time in
Mhm.
North Dakota in the 1890s or whatever it was, or 1900s. That was amazing to see that.
Our home has always been a gathering place for the Syrian folk. Not many parties or celebrations were held, except for occasions like a wedding or such. Before we built our church, the mosque, we held services at the different homes. We have a month of fasting, after which everyone visits the home of another, and there is a lot of feasting.
They're not the majority of the population, but they have a critical mass so that they're visiting each other. These Muslims, they're praying together. They're celebrating Eid together. Somebody in the community plays the oud.
No way.
Yeah, somebody is really good at singing, and during the Prophet's birthday, the Maulid al-Nabi, somebody is singing nasheeds or praise songs to the Prophet.
Well, how do you feel knowing that's a thing? How does that make you feel?
Yeah, I was. It was kind of a mixed feeling, because as you mentioned that the Native American population, unfortunately, they got dispossessed of their land, and it's kind of relating to what's happening in the Palestinians, obviously. But at the same time, the Muslim people who were coming here, obviously that was not their intention, and they probably were not aware of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But it was good to see that these families were still keeping on to their culture and their religion, and trying to preserve it as long as they could. And unfortunately, in that particular story, the community, they ended up most of them leaving to other parts of the U.S.
Yeah.
So that part of the Muslim community was gone, but inshallah it'll come back again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were set up to fail. That land was just not meant to be farmed, and so they were promised they would be able to keep the land if they can farm it. But
Yeah.
really, the strategy was to just dispossess the native peoples there. So, yeah, it's unsavory, it's disgusting, and honestly, it's cruel. And justice in this case would be repossessing that land to the people who are the true owners. But still, like knowing that those people were there helps us, I think, contextualize the fact that they were not like this pariah. There was no question of whether or not they could be part of that society in that area. They were Muslim. That was cool. But also, they had the same mission that everybody else had, which is survive the winters, try to feed their families, try to grow as a family, and be good neighbors. And so I think if we can return to that too, that'd be nice. But that's not a job for us, you know. I think that's a job for other folks.
And now, a quick word from our sponsor.
Craving bold, flavorful Mexican food with a twist? Come down to El Halal Amigos in San Jose, where authentic Mexican dishes meet the quality and taste of hand-slaughtered halal meats. From sizzling barbacoa beef ribs and cheesy birria tacos to mouth-watering burritos with our signature nar sauce. We've got all of your favorites, made fresh from scratch just for you. Check us out online, elhalalamigos.com. We'll see you here. Orale Habibi.
It seems like there was definitely a point in time where Muslims were not seen as much as an other or an external threat. And I just, I hope maybe one day we can get back to that and really just make America great again, inshallah.
Make
Oh, where
America
did you get that from? That was a good line.
Yeah.
That's a good one. I think I got to use that.
You should run. I think I'll wear that on a hat.
One of my favorite stories from American Muslim history, if you will. Have you heard of the story of Hajj Ali?
Of course.
Now, this is one of my favorite stories. I'll just touch upon it a little bit. I'd love to know your own research on it as well. Umar Effendim talks about this story. It's just very, very fascinating time. We're talking about, was it 1856? Hajj Ali had become one of the first camel drivers. He was working for the U.S. Army. And this was around the time the U.S. Army started an experiment called the United States Camel Corps. Yeah. So they wanted to use the camels as pack animals. And so he did a round trip excursion via camel from Texas, essentially to L.A. and back. And one of the things when they got to LA is, he's like, this is really beautiful. We got the beaches. It seems almost like home. Let's get some palm trees in here as well. And so that's one of the reasons why there's all these palm trees in LA, which is like a signature LA look, is because of the Middle Easterns who are like, let's recreate what paradise feels like, what home feels like. And, getting to a point where, of course, like that, we don't see camels in the military today. So obviously the experiment was abandoned. The horses, the mules, they get scared of the camels. So that didn't quite work out on a practical level. And then, of course, Congress didn't want to fund it because, there was a whole civil war that was breaking out. So it's just bad timing. But if anyone in the Army is hearing this, maybe we could try it again. Yeah. And then my favorite thing is, of course, that like his grave in Arizona, there's a whole monument there, like an entire pyramid that they built with a little metal camel on top.
You missed the best part. You missed my favorite part of the whole story, which is that they called him High Jolly because they couldn't pronounce Hajj Ali, so they called him High Jolly. Which is my favorite thing. It's so silly.
That's nice,
and it's so relatable to people like us.
I got it. Have you done the pilgrimage out to the High Jolly Monument?
No, I'm not like a pilgrimage to the High Jolly kind of guy.
That's on my bucket list for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to be on the phone. You should FaceTime me when you get there. Let's do that.
There you go.
I'm from New Jersey, man. I'll make a pilgrimage to like the bagel shop. That's about as far as I'll get.
And that's about it. I mean, you're on the East Coast. You don't have to drive too far to get around either. There's a lot of tiny states next to each other. I grew up in California for 17 years, and then I moved to Texas a couple years ago. We just drove from the Bay Area to Austin, Texas, and it took 4 days.
Yeah.
Imagine if we had camels.
I can't wait for 4 days to get to someplace. If I'm on the train and the train is delayed 5 minutes, my day is ruined.
That's a game
Wow.
over. Um, I'm really interested. You talked a little bit about how like history, we see it as a static thing, but it's a lot more dynamic than you would think. And then also about the lenses through which we look at stories and all the different lenses that people use to look at stories. And it kind of comes back to this, I brought this idea before up on this podcast, and I'd love to get your take on truth versus reality.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I like
Um,
where this is going.
the factual and also you brought up Rami, and there's no other reference that we make on this podcast as much as we make about Rami, the show. Listen to season 2. I think almost every
Yeah.
episode
Yeah.
we talk about Rami once or twice. Um, just because there was so many things that he did first and that we've seen happen a lot since then. So one of the things that really pissed Muslims off after the first season was that this is not our experience. This is not what we do. And we can't believe that Rami is doing these things. Now, did Rami actually do these exact things? Were they factual history? Was this an emotional truth that he conveyed as part of his experience in general? Did he actually, help a hijabi woman cheat on her husband during Ramadan? Or is this an emotional truth that he's conveying? Because ultimately, a lot of people believe that, hey, Rami actually did this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he is a terrible person. And how can he air his dirty laundry? And all Muslims are not like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's still power in what he said, because there are a lot of people who are like, wait, I've done this. Not the exact same thing, but I have had similar experiences. Now, I find that during that first wave of backlash, the only voices you heard were, this is not us. And the reason why is because the people who would have said this is us don't want to out themselves. And yet it struck a chord. There's a certain truth in there that struck a chord. So, as a journalist, someone who's studying history, in this show, we're looking at history. What is true? What is real? And does it matter?
What is true? What is real? And did Rami let a hijabi cheat on her husband during Ramadan? Okay, all good questions. What is true and what is real does matter, obviously, especially as a journalist. But I think one of the things that people get hung up on is this idea that truth is singular, right? It's not. And it's an Islamic idea, if you think about it this way. In the Quran, God calls himself the Lord of all worlds. All worlds, not the world, right? So you can like think of this like Doctor Strange, like multi-reality kind of thing. Or the way that I like to think of it is we're all worlds and we all experience reality in the way that we experience it. And our reality might not reflect the person next to ours reality, right? Especially if we want to think of Islam as this thing that exists for all people for all time. It would make sense to me that we would have very various experiences of what real, true reality is for us, you know? And that's what I love about like that verse describing Allah describing himself as being the ruler of all worlds. It's a beautiful way of thinking, honestly. Anyways, so as a journalist, the goal always is to avoid bias. You want to be as even keeled and try to reflect as many realities as you can. The challenge is this is literally impossible. There's nothing that exists at all that is experienced the same way by every single person. So if you are a journalist, your challenge when retelling the story of an event is to reflect a broad enough reality that it's relatable and understood by enough people, right? One of the great tragedies of our time is the rise, in my opinion, of the anti-establishment media, the people who love to point out small mistakes or small details in certain media as a way to discredit the entire thing. It's impossible for any one human person to create something so unimpeachable that it is experienced the same way by everybody. Let me give you an example. So one of my most successful stories, I would say, is the story of George Floyd in Minneapolis when he went to go spend that counterfeit $20 or allegedly counterfeit $20 bill, and the police were called. The police came. They sat on his neck for an atrocious amount of time until he stopped being responsive, and he later died. Now, there were people who saw what happened from the window. There were people who saw what happened from their cars. There were people who saw what happened from the sidewalk. And there were people who were police officers who were there kind of scoping the scene and sort of, participating in the arrest. But not directly, not even the person. We're not even talking about Derek Chauvin, the person who sat on the knee. Now, would you for a moment believe me if I told you that every single person in every single instance saw the exact same thing?
Impossible.
It's impossible. Right? Everybody has their perspective. Everybody brings the wealth of their experience on this earth up until that moment, and all of that colors their experience. So as a journalist, when you go and you talk to 6 or 7 or 8 people, you're going to get different versions of every single story. Right? And you need to factor in where they were, how they saw it, how they felt about it, their lens, their biases, all of this. And then you also need to factor in all of your own experience and all of what you've seen and all of you've experienced. All of this is to say that this is the great challenge of being a storyteller, and especially like somebody like Rami, who was the first, right? He's trying to tell the very first comprehensive story of the American Muslim who isn't perfect. Now, he's going to have his own personal experience. Even his sister in the show, this character, is not experiencing the reality of being Muslim in the same way as he is, right? She has her own challenges. The mother, not experiencing it the same way that Rami is. Same thing with the father. This is all dynamic. And I think every other community is not faced with the same pressures that we are, with needing to tell our stories more, they get a lot more leeway, right? You want to use the Jewish community as an example. Think of Larry David, the show. Is anybody watching that show thinking, okay, this is the typical Jewish experience? No. He's got personality. He's got his perspective. He's got his feelings. He's kind of a dick. He's like from New York, and he's brought like that New York edge and perspective to LA. And then this LA perspective is like clashing with that, right? Rami is sort of the same thing as far as having a particular narrow viewpoint into the complicated life of a Muslim in America. But for somebody who is in Texas, or somebody who grew up in Florida, or even in Dearborn, Michigan, right, where there's a lot of Muslims and Arabs, for them to say, oh, well, I don't understand the show at all. It doesn't reflect my experience of being a Muslim. Of course it's not. What are you talking about? It's not supposed to. This show isn't called Muslim America, right? That show hasn't been made yet, like we had just made it in PBS. This show is called Rami. It's about Rami. So it's insane. It's cruel. It's honestly, you're confusing the show Rami the way that every other media has ever been made. You're holding it to a different standard, an impossible standard, mind you, not because you're mean or you don't get media, but because the stakes are so freaking high for our community, right? Before Rami, and this is a joke that he used to tell in his stand-up, the Muslims had only one show, and it was the news, right? So he's competing with that. And I think we need to be a lot more graceful and considerate of the fact that he's taking a huge risk and putting his name and his face and his likeness and associating it with this complicated mess of a story that's entertaining, engaging for a non-Muslim audience, so that he can get into their minds and show the kinds of daily struggles that Muslims have that have nothing to do with Islam, right? He's trying to get married. He's like wants to be a good person. He has this idealized version of himself, and he hates himself because it's like so difficult for him to live up to that. That's a human thing, man. And so for somebody to be like, well, I grew up in Canada, or I grew up in, Montreal or whatever, and I don't relate to this guy's story. Cool. Make your show. Yeah. And I'm sure Rami won't be able to relate to yours either. So I would say this idea that there's an objective reality that we are all members of it doesn't make sense. It's not Islamic. And this horrible judgment that we bestowed on Rami because he doesn't like show Muslims like picking up trash, or like paying
Mhm.
zakat, and that's the whole episode. Could you imagine how boring that would be?
Mm.
You know, here's this guy, he shows up and he prays, Fajr in the masjid, and then he goes and he does charity and he cleans up the toilets. The end.
And then that just feeds into the good Muslim, bad Muslim trope. And I know Dr. Maithil Hassan was involved as well in the show, and she has, this amazing report called Haq in Hollywood that was published a few years ago that explores all the different tropes. And right now, I want to say like the post Rami era. And yeah, it's true. A lot of people conflate the show with all Muslims. Just how anytime there's some sort of attack carried out by someone who happens to be Muslim, we're all like, well, not all Muslims. We're not all like that. But then Rami comes out with a show, and then the not all Muslim crowd, they're quiet. It's like, this is his experience. He literally put his name in the show. That's his experience.
Also, he's trying to create something that will open the doors, that will get executives excited. He's trying to get something that gets Muslims who are young, who are being told that they can only be doctors or engineers or lawyers, to get excited about a different kind of life. One that will actually empower them in a different way.
That's why he got Mia Khalifa on the show. A lot of young Muslims got excited about that one.
Did you see her interview with the New York Times? Very compelling stuff.
I don't think I have. I'll need to get that link from you later.
Yeah.
It's, we're talking about the truth, factual, what's real, what's not real. Amir Suleiman talks about this a lot as well, because he's a storyteller, he's a poet. And he talks about how there's just one truth, is al-haq. That is God. And we are not al-haq, and we can't perceive al-haq in its completeness. And so we are very limited, like you said, like this is the part of the human experience that I get to experience, and no one else ever will get to experience it this way. You're talking about the Muslim that served during Civil War, and how essentially he was captured, and they have all this documentation of how Islam was experienced and expressed. Again, that's not how all Muslims at the time did it. That's how he did it. Right. And so when Rami is doing a show now, we have so many shows. Of course, we need more, always more, because Muslims are very creative. And I think we're having this golden moment between, Miss Marvel hitting the mainstream, even getting stuff like Moon Knight that's pushing a little bit of more cultural awareness, to We Are
Lady Parts. Yes, I was hoping to bring it up. That show is awesome.
One of my favorite. We talk about that one a lot as well, because it's sort of like, I don't even remember the Taqwa Core movement with the Kaminas and Michael Muhammad Knight.
Wait, I have my book. Where is it? Oh, I put it away. I had it right here. I have like 4 of his books.
Oh man, which ones?
Damn it. Osama Van Halen. Or The Journey to the End of Islam is another one of my favorites.
That's a great one. I need to get tripping with
here it
is. But there you go. Journey to the End of Islam. I love that, man. So that whole movement really was ahead of its time. By 10, 20 years is really powerful stuff, but it's just felt like the media landscape wasn't quite ready for that. It had its success, it had its peak, but still, like right now you mention it and not many folks will remember. But now it's time to be able to latch on to that idea. So they really sort of planted the seeds and set the stage for everything that comes, really builds on what the generation before it created. So I'm quite excited what this next generation is going to be creating, because, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier, representation is not enough. The first stage of representation is tokenization. The Haq in Hollywood report goes a little bit deeper into this. Highly recommend anyone who's interested in this reading that, as well as The Cultural Imperative of Islam by Dr. Umar Farooq Abdullah. It's another great one. And so it's just, you look back at how Muslims have been portrayed, and a lot of times it is not portrayed by Muslims. And so, we've gotten to a point where the lowest rungs of representation have been achieved. Okay, we got a Disney show. Let's get that out of our system. And now let's start focusing on the broad spectrum of stories. Okay, well, what is your story? What is your family story? Let's actually get a little bit more nuance there. And then taking it to the next level, because I truly believe that representation is not the be all end all. it is the absolute lowest rung of what we're trying to achieve. Are there Muslims that are writing this? Are there Muslims that are directing this? Are there Muslims that are working on this? We had God, what is his name now? This guy who plays Uncle Charlie's War, Rizwan
Rizwan
Manji.
Manji.
Yeah, I don't know how I brain farted his name. So we had Rizwan Manji on the show last season, season 2, and he was talking about how like one of the first movies that he did, he comes in to do the scene real quick. It's a very quick recording of the scene, and the Quran is there and it's upside down, or they're doing prayer in the wrong direction and they're doing it completely wrong. So it's the idea of like that. Well, that is representation, right? Even showing a Muslim as a terrorist trope, that is representation. But it's like until we get Muslims in that seat, our story is going to actually be told. And to tie all that back into what we were talking about the truth and the reality, I want to bring it back with this Picasso quote that I really enjoy, which is that we all know that art is not truth. Art is a lie that makes us realize truth, at least the truth that is given us to understand. The artist, and I think about Rami when I see this, the artist must know the manner whereby to convince others of the truthfulness of his lie. And so that's something that always strikes me, is the truthfulness of his lie. And so, you know, through journalism, like you said, there's no possible way to not have a lens. And as storytellers, as artists, as people who are patrons of the arts, it's kind of like, well, what truths are we trying to tell, and what stories can we use to tell them?
I like that Pablo Picasso quote. I might have to put it on a magnet.
Yeah, we'll make a shirt. We'll put on a shirt and mail one out to you.
You know, I recently wrote a book, and I was thinking, like, should I start with a quote? And I was like, that sounds like a good quote.
Shout out to Picasso.
You all right?
Okay, you gotta give a shout out to Artistic Foodies in your book.
Did you know that Pablo Picasso was Muslim?
I was gonna say, man. I did my research for this episode, but I did not come across that one.
It was a lie, but it was only there to help you realize the truth.
There's some
Allah.
There's some truth in the lie there. Okay, I get it. I see what you did there.
Yalla bina.
Yalla Beena, because we want to talk about the bean pie next. I want to come back to. Listen, I'm a dad too. Okay, if we don't have our dad jokes,
Hey yo. That's actually funny.
So when we talk about the bean pie, it's really fascinating because and Irfan and I have done a lot of halal food related events. In fact, I just looked in my inbox. I pitched you in 2020 twice, and I pitched you in 2021 and 2022. One of those stories was about the Black Muslim Food Week, where we took Black History Month and we had little mini festivals where we focused simply on Black-owned businesses that were selling halal. And this is where really my exposure to the bean pie became like this huge thing. And I was hooked. I mean, seriously addicted to bean pie. And living in Oakland, like there's easy access, alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
All the time. So I find that this simple dish could tell a story. I think one of the first episodes that we have, we talk about shawarma and how shawarma itself as a food tells a history of migration from the Shami people to Latin America, to Mexico, to tacos árabes, tacos al pastor. Anyways, you want to hear that story, check out episode 4 of the first season.
Absolutely.
And so with the bean pie, what's the story there? For anyone who's listening that hasn't seen the video, doesn't know the story, what story does a bean pie tell?
Okay. You could Google bean pie, Aymann, and I'm sure it'll come up. The bean pie tells the story of the Muslim American scene in the African American community at a time when they are trying to rediscover their identity outside of the legacy of slavery. And so what they're doing at this point in time is that they are trying to separate themselves from things that are considered to be like part of the slave's diet, right? I'm putting that in quotation marks. So many of the ingredients in like pies were very fattening, and uh, they they figured out that they can use a navy bean instead, and it'll be much healthier, and it would be new. And so what they did was they replaced. I'm not remembering what they placed exactly, but so what they
The
did was
sweet
they ended up
potato
making a pie.
replace
Sweet
the sweet
potatoes.
potato. Yeah.
Sorry. So what they did was they took out the sweet potato as a way to distance themselves from the legacy of slavery, and they instead used a navy bean, and they principally created this as a way to also raise funds for their movement. And so you might find some people in certain neighborhoods selling bean pies on the side of the road. You might see them in shops that are nearby mesgids. You might see them, all with like handcrafted labels because they're all made in like someone's kitchen. And the idea is that they sell them to raise money for their communities. I didn't really grow up on them, even though I was around them a lot. I grew up in Newark, New Jersey, which I hear was like one of the best places for bee pie. I did not get that privilege to like actually sit down and eat it. My dad was always in such a rush; he needed to get back to work, and so when I first tasted it, I felt a real strong connection to not just like my own legacy of being Muslim and American, like feeling transient because my father came to this country in like the late 60s. But I felt like, okay, this tradition's been around here for a lot longer than that. So I felt like, okay, now I have like this new legacy to attach myself to and to think about as being part of my legacy as a practicing Muslim, alhamdulillah. And that's what that story of the bee pie is. It's like this thing that exists. It's the only actual real food that can be claimed as being exclusively Muslim American because of how it was created by this community and responding to their religion. And it's freaking delicious. So like if you were to have one, like you said, yeah, it's gonna you might create a habit out of it. It's a really special food.
And I feel like not only is it like the only Muslim American food, but when I think about just Muslim food in general, what makes food Muslim? It's like, you might think about the shawarma, the nihari, of biryanis, big plates of rice with goats on top of them, but these are all cultural foods.
Yeah, that's not Muslim food at all.
Right. So that, I find that absolutely fascinating. And I use that to justify my heavy
Wait,
consumption.
wait. 1 minute there. You said biryani is not Muslim food. I beg to differ that. Beg to
I do
differ.
love biryani. Matter of fact, I kind of want to get biryani later. No, it's not Muslim food. It's kind of hilarious that you go to all these Muslim events and they have like the platters always laid out. But I think it has more to do with the fact that this stuff is like reliably halal and less than it is like a Muslim tradition. That makes sense. But if it's interesting because if you go back enough, there's like certain foods that we eat all the time that we don't know the history of that are actually like foods that were created for religious purposes. Falafel, for example, something that the entire Arab region in the world consumes and loves, is a Christian food. And it was created by the Coptic Christians who were responding to their faith because they couldn't consume meat on certain days. So they needed to create a food that was vegan, and they created falafel.
Wait. I thought Israelis invented falafel. That's what.
If you really want to do an episode about that, I would love to point you in some direction.
Hummus.
The Israelis actually made it illegal to eat falafel when they were first establishing their national identity shortly after the creation of Israel. And a lot of foods that were considered to be Arab imports were not allowed to be consumed or eaten by Jewish people because they weren't considered to be Jewish foods.
Oh wow!
Obviously, that changed when I think the minister of food tasted one and was like, "Oh shit, this is banging." But no, it's like documented. They rejected it at first as it being like unclean or impure for not being purely Jewish.
And now they've got avocado hummus and chocolate hummus. And I feel like they're just trying to destroy Hamas for all of us with these flavors.
Yeah. There's a war on hummus going on.
The most important question of the whole interview: do you condemn hummus? Do you condemn?
Hey, listen, man.
what's your answer?
I think we need to address the root cause of hummus.
Really? I mean, hummus was just created after a lot of pressure and a lot of grinding and over time, and it's a natural product. What else do you expect?
Yeah, exactly. If we can't go back and think about the root cause of hummus, then how will we ever overcome hummus?
There we go.
Exactly.
We will never be able to overcome the need for hummus unless we address the root cause of hummus.
There we go.
What is the secret behind the explosive flavor?
Okay. So
Just imagining like Ismail Hanaya with like a big cooking hat like Chef Boyardee.
Let's get down to the roots.
in the big can. Big can there. So
Awful.
real question here now. So you traveled all across the US throughout your career. So the most important question that we want to know as the artistic foodies is, what are some of your favorite halal restaurants that you've come across in your travels across the US?
Favorite halal restaurants. So the thing about reality, right, is that we don't all experience halal food in the same way. Right? My favorite halal food.
Like, do you like eating at those New York halal carts? Which I
I did when I was younger, when my gut can handle it.
Yeah, now it's tough.
These days, I do a lot of like at home eating because eating out is expensive and I have kids. Let's see. Who do I want to shout out? Honestly, I can't think of. Well, you know what? I'm going to say the best halal food that I've ever had in my life. Better than what I've had in the Middle East. Better than what I've had anywhere in the world. Has to be in Paterson, New Jersey, at Basha restaurant.
Oh wow.
That's what I'm going to say.
Ever.
I would say if I were to do a pilgrimage for 4 hours driving, if there wasn't El Basha at the end of that trip, I would go to the store and get some hummus.
I mean, that's really high praise. I mean, like we're talking about. That's how Michelin rates its restaurants.
And this is Egyptian.
You drive out there.
Egyptian restaurant.
Do me a favor. Go on Google, image search, Basha restaurant, Paterson. And if you don't explode into 1,000,000 pieces, I don't know what's wrong with you.
My God, look at those lamb chops.
This is the restaurant that when I was trying to impress my father-in-law, when we were first getting to know each other, I took him here. And let me tell you, 2 kids later, it worked.
Authentic Middle Eastern cuisine.
Oh, they got the mansaf though. The mansaf. We need to do a whole episode on mansaf. Honestly,
It's like, I don't even know if it's Egyptian or Palestinian or like a fusion between the two. All I know is that it's crack.
Oh, Basha,
It is
Paterson.
straight
Okay.
sprinkled crack.
Nice.
this is why, like one of those pan-Arabian mat'ams where you've got the mansaf and you've got the kebab and the tikka, the muhammara. Yeah, man, these pictures.
You got the ruz bil laban and you have just like mulukhiyya. You got it all.
So outside of your homeland of New Jersey, what other places are good from your
Can't
travels?
even compete. I've heard a lot about Dearborn. Went to Dearborn.
Not
Compared to
impressed.
Patterson, I don't know.
I mean, you've traveled a lot across the country. Is this something that you do while you're traveling? You check out the local halal spots, find anything exciting?
I do only to like serve my purposes there as a journalist, you know? It helps a lot when you are meeting somebody for the first time and you're going and you're like parachuting into their space and you want them to reveal their truth, is to first ask them like, hey, where should I eat? You know? They get like engaged. And I think it humanizes reporters to a degree where they're like, oh, actually, you eat like me. And so they want to like send you to spots they know. Maybe they know like the person running it. And they say, oh, yes, tell them I sent you. And after you go and you like make that trip and you come back, it's like, khalas. We're basically best friends. And it's like a reliable trick. No matter what culture you're from, no matter what country you're from, no matter what state you're in, if you're a journalist, this is the best advice I can give you. Before you start the interview, tell them that you're hungry and that you want to eat someplace. And you can invite them or not, whatever. But afterwards, y'all will be like two chickpeas and a hummus.
Hey, what's that pea doing in my hummus? Yeah, no, this is. I mean, this is big facts. Also, just like the stories behind. Sometimes I find that while I'm traveling, there's three things that I do whenever I travel to a new place. Right. Number one is find out what the local halal food is like, and through that learn the stories of what Muslims in that land are like. All right, so I'm in Patterson, I'm seeing a lot of Arab restaurants. What's that telling me? I'm in Detroit. I don't even like cooked fish, but some of the best fish I've had was this entire fried red snapper at a Senegalese restaurant.
Excuse me, did you just say that you don't like fish?
I don't eat, I like it raw. That's facts. Anyone that knows
What,
me knows I like it raw, but like cooked fish, no way. Except for this one, I'm going to shout out Maddie's in Detroit, Senegalese restaurant, whole red snapper. Have that with a jollof rice. Unbelievable, right? And so like these foods, they get to tell a little bit of stories. And so I'm sure you've been to Chicago. Have you visited Devon?
No, I have not visited Devon. I don't really care for Chicago.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's because you haven't had Devon.
Listen. My biggest issue with Chicago, honestly, is that it's impossible to get around. The L sucks, driving sucks, walking sucks. It's like, if you figure that out, maybe I'll come around.
I can't really argue with that there. And that explains why, like, really, like, all the Daisies, they just hang out at Devon in North Chicago, and you don't see too many of them around anywhere else.
I was recently there for the DNC, for the Democratic National Convention. Kind of a shit show.
Did they let you inside?
I was the one who brushed Kamala's hair before she went out on stage.
The honor, man. Lucky guy.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
I was saying Mazatin into her right ear.
You got to whisper that a little louder, man.
All right. So, come to the end of the episode. Thank you very much for joining us. And before we end, we wanted to let the people know where they can find more information about your reading. Where they can find some more information about your writings and your videos. Where can people find you?
You could find me by Googling me. It's spelled Aymann, but I really need to urgently instruct everyone listening to reserve their copy of my book coming out, inshallah. It's going to be called Becoming Baba. It's about fatherhood. It's about Islam. It's about everything that we have questions about. It was a long time coming. I've been working on it for about 3 years, and when it comes to publishing, it's all about the pre-sale numbers. So let's juice that lemon, and let's try and help the boy out. Inshallah. They see the success, so then we do what Rami did. We open the doors and we tell more stories in a more variety way. Inshallah.
Are you gonna have an audio version of this book too?
Maybe. I kind of want to do read like the paragraph and then use the AI to just do it.
I listen to the audiobooks because of my commute, but
I just can't imagine sitting down and reading a book and like feeling good about it. Because I as the person who wrote it, I'm gonna be like, damn, can we change this? Can we change that? Oh, I shouldn't have used that word. Oh, what about this story? It's just gonna drive me nuts.
I just don't know how to read. Can you send it to me on Reels? Where's the TikTok version?
I'll call you and I'll read it to you if you reserve it.
No, but inshallah, yeah. But definitely you should look into the making the audio version, because that's a very nowadays very popular way for people.
I think it's gonna happen. But let me tell you, in like the first, I think like somewhere in the middle of the second chapter, I dig into the story about how my mom intentionally didn't teach me to cook because she wanted my sister to learn all of that stuff. And so for her as a mom, she wanted to train my sister to become a mom.
Mhm.
But then there's this gap in knowledge because I want to feel more attached to my culture. I want to know how to make a kofta. I want to know how to make these dishes because I want to feel attached to like the lineage that goes back 1,000 years in Egypt. But she's very adamantly, she's like, no, I'm not going to teach you to cook. I say, why, mama? And she says, well, if I teach you to cook, you'll have no reason to ever come home. It's like a very touching moment.
Oh, wow.
But then eventually I convince her to teach me, and then I put the recipe in the book. So if you want to know how to make kofta the way my mom makes it, which I'm telling you, you do, you got to reserve your copy now.
Nice.
It's called Becoming
nice,
Baba.
nice.
It's being published through Double Day, and you can find it on Amazon. You can find it on Barnes & Noble, whatever.
Inshallah.
That's such a sweet note that you said about your mom. Like I've cooked. I've cooked for so long now where I'm very confident in my cooking skills, and there's certain dishes that I have not, will not touch because my mom makes it. And if I learn how to cook it, it's kind of that same thing. It's like when I go back home, like that's what I'm craving is the chicken karai that she makes. I'm craving that biryani. I could teach myself biryani. I know it. My biggest fear is that I would kill it and it would be even better. So I'm like, let's not even touch that.
You're so humble.
I don't want to go down that road. I don't want to take these unnecessary risks.
Oh,
you know
my
what I'm saying?
God. Oh, my God.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Artistic Foodies. Before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts.
Be sure to find us on Facebook and Instagram to stay tuned for more episodes as well as bonus content. You can also have access to all of our episodes at theartisticfoodies.com.
This podcast has been brought to you by HalalFest Incorporated and GAMA, Gathering All Muslim Artists.